Welcome, friends. Thank you all for being here. I hope you can hear me. I'm Susanna Mattingly, and I work for Friends World Committee for Consultation, also known as FWCC. So welcome to this webinar on Quakers coming together to care for the earth, and welcome to everybody who is watching the recording of this event. I know there was a lot of people who wanted to join, but we didn't have space for, so thank you all for taking time to join this conversation in whatever way is possible. This is a very exciting call. We have friends from all over the world, across all 4 FWCC sections: section of the Americas, the Africa section, the Asia West Pacific section, and Europe and Middle East section, all joining together in this webinar. And we're covering a lot of different time zones. And in fact, I think there are even some friends who've woken up in the middle of the night to join us. So, Friends World Committee for Consultation, or FWCC as I'll call us for short, is the world Quaker body, and we represent about 400,000 friends around the world in 87 different countries. The World Office of FWCC is based in London in the UK. And as I said, my name is Susanna Mattingly. I run the sustainability programme, which was launched in 2017 to help promote sustainability action in the global Quaker community. And this project builds on several significant global commitments to sustainability that have been made in recent years. Notably the Kabarak Call for Peace and Eco-Justice, which came out of the World Conference in Kenya in 2012. Some of you will have been there. And subsequently the PSAC Sustainability Minute, which was approved at the World Plenary Meeting in Peru in 2016, which called on yearly meetings around the world to take action on sustainability. The program, the sustainability program, has been funded by Britain Yearly Meeting, a legacy grant, and we hope to continue this sustainability work beyond next year, and we're currently seeking funding to support this program into the future. So before we begin today's webinar, I just want to explain a little about how this webinar came about. So throughout 2018, several public friends came together via video conferences and one face-to-face meeting to discuss what we as Quakers are called to do about what we describe as the interlocking ecological issues affecting all of creation. The participants in this group include friends from across the Quaker spectrum, including those affiliated with FWCC, Evangelical Friends North America, Friends United Meeting, Friends General Conference, and other unaffiliated friends. Each of the participants in these meetings has felt a strong spiritual calling to take action in their own lives and at times as part of the Quaker organizations that they are affiliated with on earthcare concerns. And throughout our work as a group, environmental justice has emerged as a unifying theme in our leadings and in ways that we can work together. One of the things this group has been working on together in recent months is to produce a video, which we've also called Quakers Coming Together to Care for the Earth, which features friends from across the theological traditions in North America, joining together to share their testimonies on environmental justice, earthcare, and stewardship. And this video is available on our website, www.fwcc.world, alongside some guidelines that we've put together for discussing the video in your meeting or your church. And after this webinar, I will send round the link to the video and the guidelines so that you can watch these and use these in your own time. So this webinar is the first in a series that this group will be running on the theme of earthcare, and we hope to hold some of the future webinars at different times of day to allow friends who couldn't join live on this occasion to join in. So, onto the webinar itself. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce 2 of the Quakers who are involved in this group as our speakers today, Lindsey Fielder Cook and Adrian Halverstadt. Lindsey is the representative for climate change at the Quaker United Nations Office in Geneva, which is also known as QUNO. And Lindsey's work at QUNO focuses on climate change and environmental degradation as a peace and justice concern, engaging at an international level with the climate change negotiations, climate science, human rights efforts, while seeking to connect international progress with grassroots efforts. And Adrian is Director of Evangelical Friends Church North America and also Superintendent of Rocky Mountain Yearly Meeting. He is a recorded Friends minister with more than 30 years of pastoral service. And he is also Chancellor at Berkeley College, where he is a Professor of Christian Theology in the Master of Arts, Director of Distance Learning Studies, and Professor in the Undergraduate Bible and Ministry Division. Many of you will know that there's a hugely diverse spectrum of Quaker theology around the world. And so I just ask you to approach this session and any different expressions of Quaker spirituality that you hear today with open hearts and minds. Our speakers may use language and vocabulary to describe their experiences that feels unfamiliar to you, but I want to encourage you to listen to the truth that's deeper than any words. The different theological traditions of our two speakers today just reminds us of the diversity of friends all around the world. And there is something for everyone. Each of us are just a small part of the world family of friends. The diversity within our global family is our strength, and it's something that is worth celebrating. So before we begin, I'll just briefly explain some of the Zoom controls that you'll see on your screen to help orientate you. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a row of icons, including chat and participants. And if you click on these icons, they'll appear on the right-hand side of your screen where you can then interact with them. It's really important that everybody stays muted throughout this call, as we're expecting a large number of people to join, so it really won't work if we all try and speak at the same time. So please don't unmute yourself. But if you have a question, please type it in using the chat box. And you can choose whether to send a direct chat message just to me by selecting my name, Susanna Mattingly, from the drop-down list, or you can send a group message to everybody. And if you have questions for the speakers, which we will take at the end of the session, please send these to me using the chat function. Just type them in, and I'll attempt to sort of group similar questions together, and then we can put these to Lindsey and Adrian at the end. So just in terms of the running order, the meeting will last for up to 1 hour. And I'll very shortly hand over to Lindsey and Adrian, who are going to share their contributions in turn. And then to end with, we're going to have an opportunity for some questions and answers. So just to reiterate, given the number of us on this call, it's important everyone stays muted, even during the question and answer. So it's not going to be possible to ask questions verbally, but please type your questions in using the chat function on your screen, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. And lastly, just to remind you that we are recording this webinar, and we'll be able to share it with you and the slides that accompany it afterwards, as well as links to the videos which I mentioned earlier, in case you want to share this with other Quakers in your community. So I'm now going to hand over to Lindsey, who will take us through the next 10 or 15 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Perfect.
Perfect. I realize everybody else can't say anything, but I'm going to have faith. Friends, I'm going to talk about the topic that we decided, but I want to talk about it through the experience of what Susanna mentioned, which is a group of primarily United States-based Quakers across theological traditions who sought together and are still seeking a shared voice on this concern of environmental degradation, of climate change, of the whole environmental crisis. And so I've put together my 10 minutes to really address that experience of trying to find this shared voice. And in that, I will talk about my own spiritual journey in this, and also the work that I do a bit. And I would like to finish with some of the things that I think Quakerism can give us and empower us in bringing together our communities, some of whom feel as we do and think as we do, and others who may be very hesitant. So what we're talking about here is sharing an example of trying to bring together people and find a shared voice. So I want to say thank you to Susanna and to FWCC for this opportunity. And I want to thank Adrian, who's going to speak after me. It's meant a great deal to have supported this US Quaker group in seeking a shared voice, and today to share this space with him. I'm an American, but I left the US at age 20 to study in England, and now at age 56, most of my adult life has been overseas. And I came to Quakerism by chance in my early 20s, doing academic work in Belfast. And in Quakerism, I found a place where, as a Christian, I could breathe. And I am part of a liberal, non-programmed Quaker community, but I married into an extended family that is a free church evangelical community. And I've served on FWCC committees which strive to bring together evangelical, FUM Orthodox, and liberal Quaker voices. And I'm aware that for Evangelical Friends, this is not always easy, not always supported within their communities. And I am thankful for their courage and kindness and for the learning that we give each other. Initially, I was not part of this Quaker group of shared voices coming together. I'd heard about them, and I sought to find a way to bring the Quaker climate change work to their attention. And I joined around the same time as Susanna last year, really to support this group. And we've seen, Susanna and I, our role in supporting this group in ways that we can, in bringing in, where appropriate, the experiences of Quakers worldwide. But in my case, bringing in the experience of quiet diplomacy efforts with a diverse group of countries at the international climate change negotiations, and in supporting international climate science efforts to more simply communicate their findings and to include sufficient research on sustainable lifestyles, consumption, economic systems, when collating their reports. But as I described, I really wanted to join this group for something deeper. There was a longing to support my countrymen and my countrywomen in what I knew was a painfully politicized issue and an already painfully polarized country. And I longed to connect with these courageous people who were searching to find a shared voice on what is possibly the most profound challenge facing humanity today. And I would describe that challenge as how to live sustainably and justly on this earth. Being present with them has been one of the most rewarding experiences in my work this year and last year, of trying to hear and to hold each member as we seek words that would touch the hearts of all, and bring back to our communities these words, and to engage our communities in seeking ways to face what is happening around us. I begin by confessing that I gave environmental justice, earthcare, and stewardship little thought until about 19 years ago. I did, and I still do, kill houseplants. I avoid gardening. And before, my passion has always been and remains also peace and humanitarian work. For me, it was doing this work in conflict zones. I'm in Northern Ireland with inner city Catholic and Protestant children, at Cuno, New York as an intern, with Friends United meeting in Ramallah as a teacher in the occupied West Bank, and then followed with human rights and humanitarian aid work with the United Nations back in the West Bank, in Gaza, in the former Yugoslavia, and in Somalia. Yet 19 years ago, my first child was born, and I slowed down. And as I held him in his sleep, I started to read about climate change and wider environmental destruction at our hands. And I came to realize that everything I loved was being threatened, not by some foreign dictator. It was not a matter of simply pointing a finger at someone else and blaming, but by us and humanity. And I came to understand that climate change was a peace and justice concern. And I went back to graduate school, and since 2013, as Susanna mentioned, I've been the representative for climate change at the Quaker United Nations Office in Geneva. I have an office space here in Bonn, Germany, where I'm sitting now, where the UN has its secretariat on climate change. And I asked myself, what could I offer this brave group of US Quakers seeking a shared voice on environmental degradation? And where helpful, I shared stories from our quiet diplomacy, our work at the climate change negotiations, about creating a safe, off-the-record space for a diverse group of countries, maximum 20 negotiators, one from each country, to hear each other speak of hope and of their fears and their frustrations, to speak from the heart, to make a human connection in a negotiation process that is more about economics than about protecting nature. I explained to my US Quaker friends that no negotiator denied that climate change was happening. No one argued what was causing it. The pain and mistrust is about who is most responsible, who is accountable, when nobody is doing their fair share and nobody is doing enough to save the vulnerable now and all our future generations from profound suffering. I shared what I understood of the latest climate science. I shared the urgency, but I also cautioned about the need for us to sort of accept the science as if we all need to be on the same page. Because maybe we don't need to all be on the same page. We can begin by talking about what we see, what we experience in our hometown, what we see that we love that is dying. Susanna and I shared our stories of Quakers worldwide. We talked about British Quakers being the first church in Britain to divest in fossil fuels and bringing high-level faith leaders to meet climate scientists. We talked of Kenyan Quaker friends so vulnerable to growing seasons that were shifting dramatically. We talked of New Zealand Quakers connecting me with their national climate change negotiators, and of the many US Quaker meetings which signed the 2014 Quaker Statement on Climate Change that CUNA wrote with Quaker Earthcare Witness and FCNL in Washington. For me, the hardest sentence to say was, as an American, friends, we are so far behind. It is my environmental justice, driven by intergenerational justice, the realization that how we choose to live now, the actions we take, will define how the most vulnerable communities and all our future generations will live or not live. My care for intergenerational justice is driven by intergenerational grief that I see in Germany, where I live. Few of my neighbors, I would say, have stories they can be proud of, stories from their parents or their grandparents which said, what did you do when you knew? And in interlocking ecological issues affecting all creation, will our generations act or not act urgently and sufficiently to stem the rate of rising global temperatures, the rate of species extinction, the rate of ocean acidification and the reduction of oxygen, the rate of land use change and degradation and chemical pollution, all unprecedented rates in our human history that threaten ecosystem collapse? And that without sufficient transformation of those root causes that are driving them, there is a potential in the next 100 years to destroy human civilization and Earth's ecosystems as we know them. And the gift that many human activities, or the gift that we have, is that many of the human activities driving one environmental crisis, in healing one, will help heal another. Because transforming these activities of one connects directly. Anyone who's seen the 9 planetary boundaries, the Stockholm Resilience Institute, I encourage you to Google that after this talk, to look at how everything is so interconnected. And the physical transformations are well known. We talk about rapid reduction of fossil fuels, we talk about rapid increase in renewables, rapid increase in energy efficiency, sustainable agriculture, sustainable economics, lower consumption, including meat and dairy diets, etc., etc. As the Quaker economist Kenneth Boulding asked us in the 1960s, how can we have unlimited material growth on a planet with limited natural resources? A transformation to hold in the long term must be grounded in spiritual transformation, in acting from the heart, from our faith, from our love for God's creation that is suffering at our watch, often rooted in the very teachings that Jesus gave and shared with us and died to give us. Love and forgiveness, not greed and collection of wealth. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And when your neighbor is suffering at your hand, what do we do? I'd like to end with a few reflections on how I believe our faith and our shared Quaker testimonies can help us heal, steward, and protect God's creation. Simplicity, integrity, which included in that responsibility, accountability for what we are doing and what we need to do to help heal, peace, equality, fair burden sharing, and more recently to many Quaker meetings, stewardship and sustainability. And within that, what I find such a strength in my Quakerism is that Quakerism upholds a personal witness and political action. And that combination is crucial. When Quakers worked with other communities and faith communities to abolish slavery, they had the personal witness of not only slaves, but you had to have the political action and the cry for a moral call to conscience to change laws. We do not have a creed, and we recognize a person's spiritual journey with God cannot be defined alone by another's theology. Each of us has a contribution in transforming the activities destroying God's creation in ourselves and in our countries. We talk of being moved by the Spirit, not solely by the Word. And I think with that we inspire, we can embrace our imperfections and keep asking more, what more can we do? We can always work to heal, at times even when this whole challenge feels so overwhelming. George Fox encouraged us to walk cheerfully over the world, answering that of God in everyone. And what can we share with our wider communities? In empathy, in imperfection, in inspiration, our faith in common humanity, which gives us hope. A Quaker yearly meeting quoted, "Love rather than fear can still lead us through this crisis." Let us speak from the heart. Let us give in love. Let us help to heal what is around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsey. Adrian, I'm going to invite you to share your contribution when you are ready.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Lindsey. Welcome, friends. It is great to be here with you. As I share with you today, I want to provide some PowerPoints for you. They'll be available, I think, afterwards for you to study. So I'll be moving through them quickly, but there should be enough information there that you can go back and research if you like, and of course send me questions that I may be able to address. Did my screen share?
Yes, that's worked, Adrian. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Well, the question is, what will it take for Quakers to come together in earthcare? And that's been the question that several of us have been discussing over a period of many months, and even today as we gather here in a global community desiring to see things change in our world and have more concerted effort in changing the world, the climate of the world and such. The question arises, what will it take? I believe that for us to come together around the world and caring for the earth as Quakers, we're going to need a sacramental relationship. I took a stab at defining what I mean by that. I mean, when I speak of a sacramental relationship around earthcare, I'm talking about a bond or a conviction which we choose to enter into with one another. It's a commitment, a bond, a conviction to develop intimacy and service around a shared conviction that we have. It's a responsibility of each of us to extend grace to one another in areas where we have this similarity. We are pretty diverse as we gather here today for this webinar. We can easily distract ourselves by talking about those differences. We will find energy and we will gain activity as we're able to set aside the dissimilarities and focus in on that which we hold to sacramentally one with the other. How can we make this happen? Well, here's a couple of ideas that I have. First, we have that common conviction. We love, we respect, we care for the earth. There it is. That's who we are. That's our common conviction. I think as we focus on intimacy with one another and moving forward, we'll be able to work more closely together and accomplish things. One of the things I learned 40 years ago as I was going through premarital counseling with my now wife, Lisa, was the definition of intimacy. Intimacy. And I think that's the key to developing sacramentally with one another. And that is being willing to look inside of one another, being vulnerable enough to share with one another really what our heart is, our passion is. And then it involves showing respect, blessing one another, living out lives of integrity, and taking action. I think through those things we can make it happen, and I'm sure you can present many more things or contribute many more things that will help us as Quakers around the world to move closer together and accomplish great things. I've defined conflict as two porcupines in a snowstorm. They're cold and they come together, but they forget to put their quills down and they poke and jab one another. Well, here we are as Quakers. We're cold in the sense that we want to see the earth cared for, but when we're focusing on our differences, when we keep our quills up, we repel one another. So let's not do that. Let's figure out how to do that best. So with the remainder of the time I have with you and the final slides that I want to share with you, I want to be intimate with you. I want you to be able to see into me what motivates me to care for the earth. And I think in looking into the heart of Adrian and hearing my heart on this subject, you're going to connect with the majority of evangelical friends around the world. Because, boy, we're an odd lot. But we look very similar in many ways. And what motivates us is very similar as well. So I just want to take some time to share with you why and how evangelical friends engage this topic of earth care. And I share that with you because evangelical friends are in 41 countries around the world. Chances are you're going to bump into some of us. And I would want you to extend an invitation to pull us into whatever the earth care effort is you are putting forward. And I think you'll find that evangelical friends would want to participate. But how do you engage in evangelical friends, or what motivates friends, evangelical friends, in earth care? Well, begin with Jesus Christ. Again, we're very diverse and our theological positions are different, and I'm not trying to push one over the other. I just want you to hear my heart and what motivates evangelical friends in this area. And so, as you probably are aware, evangelical friends hold pretty high Jesus Christ and his coming to earth and what that means. And so when you engage in evangelical friends on the subject of earth care, I would say, talk to them about why Jesus Christ came to earth. Jesus says, I have come that you can have the life abundant, or the life that God wants you to have. Jesus also said, I've come to earth to judge the earth. One of the mistakes that evangelicals make when interpreting the Bible is they take the words of the Bible and use their own native language, in my case, English, coming from the Latin. They would take words from their native tongue, like the English, and use it to interpret what God would mean in the Bible. And sometimes that's okay. Other times it hurts us. On this subject of judgment, taking the English understanding of judgment would give us a misinterpretation. In fact, the Greek in which the New Testament was written uses the word krisis, and it means to make right or to reestablish something that was lost. And Jesus was saying, and evangelicals believe, that Jesus came to earth to reestablish us into what his original purpose and intent was. And so that's one good way to engage an evangelical, is to remind them that Jesus came to reestablish us into something that he had in place from the beginning. What was that place? Well, number 2, talk to them about original design, or why God sent Jesus into the earth to replenish what? Well, in Genesis, the creation account that evangelicals would hold to in verses 26 and 28 of chapter 1, God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion. And then he said in verse 28, let them be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion. And here is another word that is often misinterpreted in the evangelical context, and that is dominion. Dominion does not mean control, abuse, take advantage of, rule over, as it's used in these verses, but rather it speaks from a specific Hebrew word and the root connection to it that means bearing responsibility to bring about the purpose or the will of God. And so talk to evangelicals about that. In the beginning, God saddled you with the responsibility to bring about his purposes for the earth. We're to be stewards of it and to administrate that, and that is our responsibility. And so that would be another motivating factor and a way to connect with the evangelical friends. We know God has called us to be stewards of the earth, to live simple lives, and to consider how our choices impact the people around us and the world in which we exist. There's the call to perfection. Evangelical friends hold to the doctrine of perfection, much like what George Fox spoke of and other early friends. But when we talk about living the call to perfection, we're not talking again about the English use of the word perfect, which means flawless or without error, but we're talking about what the language of the Bible uses, and it uses the Greek word teleos. And it means to answer to one's intended purpose or original design. Best way I can illustrate that is to show you a pencil. This is a Berkeley College pencil, brand new. In the English sense, this pencil is perfect because it looks good. We assume it functions well. It is doing everything that we would think in the English it needs to do, but in the biblical use or the teleos use of perfection for this pencil, it is not perfect, because this pencil is only perfect when it's answering its intended purpose, and that is to write. So when this pencil is leaving a mark, when this pencil is writing, it is perfect. So when you speak to an evangelical friends, remind them that God created them to care for the earth. That's a part of their original design. And when they're doing that, God says to them, you're perfect. You're doing just what I want you to do. So if we use this pencil in our illustration right now, we know that we're pretty diverse as friends. In fact, we're pretty fractured, aren't we? Now I'll just break the pencil. That's our lives. As a people group, we're pretty fractured today. But the neat thing is, we have the ability in the midst of our brokenness to leave a mark together. And so as we unite in a sacramental relationship with one another to care for the earth, in spite of our brokenness, we have the property, we have the wherewithal to leave a mark on creation. And so I would encourage you, as you work with evangelical friends, to keep that in mind, that they have a desire to leave a mark for God and to be the kind of people that God wants them to be. And then the Genesis account of that original design, it basically came down to evangelicals being told of God, by God, to love him, to be obedient to him, to serve people, and to care for the earth. That's a great way to connect with evangelicals today in this area. And a fourth thing really is to remember that we believe earthcare is universal in scope. I placed in the PowerPoint a book that's pretty significant in the lives of evangelical friends. It's called The Holiness Manifesto. In 2004, Evangelical Friends convened with 12 other holiness denominations in the U.S. to define and strategize what the holiness movement would be like in the 21st century. What would we focus our attention on? How would we measure our success? And out of that work together came this book, and particularly there came out of this research and work together, collaboration, what we call the 5 calls of God, the 5 areas that we will focus on and work towards in terms of hoping to transform our culture. And the first call of God we define as being universal in nature, and that is creation care, that God intends for every person, regardless of nationality and religious affiliation, to participate in creation care. And so it's universal in scope, and it has no respecter of persons. And so as you're engaging evangelical friends, give consideration to the fact that they understand, or help them understand if you need to, that this call to earth care is universal in scope. And they can participate, and we can move beyond the differences that often keep us apart and engaging one another in service through this very understanding that caring for the earth is universal in scope. So I would encourage you, as you're working with evangelical friends around the world on this topic of earth care, to just engage them, to share with them who you are, and give them an invitation to come care for the earth with you. And I think you'll find that they'll participate in that. Evangelical friends tend to get sideways when we get to talking about the politics of it, particularly here in the U.S., as Lindsey so clearly shared with us, and the science behind it. I'm in a great group, as Suzanne mentioned, of people who love and care for the earth and want to figure that out together. And I am the weakest link in that chain. All of my friends are a part of that group. They have much more understanding on the science of earth care and climate change than I have. And when they begin speaking about that, I think they can see my eyes starting to glaze over, and I'm starting to mumble because I'm just not understanding all of that. And I have a ways to go in all of that. But if we continue to focus just on the motivation of our hearts, our love for the earth, our desire to be sacramental in our relationship with one another, building intimacy around this subject, I think we're going to go to great and wonderful places together in our work in caring for the earth. Thank you for letting me share.
Adrian, thank you so much. I'm going to end your screen sharing now. Really? You may have to do it yourself, Adrian. You may have to stop sharing your screen yourself. So whilst Adrian is doing that, we have had some questions come in through the chat already, but for those of you who missed the introduction at the start, please keep muted just so that we can manage the large number of us on this call. But if you have a question, please type it into the chat box. So at the bottom of your screen, you will have some icons. You can click on the chat icon and it will bring up a box on the right-hand side of your screen. And please send your messages either to everybody or directly to me. And I'm trying to group similar questions together as they come in. And then I will put these to Adrian and Lindsey. So whilst you're thinking about that, I have some questions that we can start with. So the first question, Quaker processes are notoriously slow, and that has many benefits. However, the climate crisis requires really urgent action. How to resolve this conundrum if Quakers are to be able to make effective and urgent contributions? Lindsey, perhaps you want to start with your thoughts on that.
Could I ask where our friend is from who asked the question?
Let me just check that for you. I think it may have been from the UK. I'm afraid I've lost the name of the person. Yeah, they don't say where they're from, I'm afraid, but I think it's the UK. Jane McCarthy. Jane McCarthy. Is it the UK? Yeah, it's the UK.
Well, I think there. Can you hear me? Yes. We see different actions of Quaker involvement in different parts of the world, and that speaks often to our involvement in terms of, are we coming from a country, for example, that's profoundly affected, very vulnerable? Are we coming from a country that's one of the highest emitters? If we're coming from a country like the UK or the European Union as a whole, there is a lot going on. And some of the things that are the most exciting things to me are actually very Quaker influenced. For example, Extinction Rebellion. When I met with them about a month and a half ago, they were talking about some of the Quakers that have been profound to their start, and also for their kind of spiritual grounding in why they're doing what they're doing. What's fascinating to me is that the political effect of that movement within a few weeks of some of their protests in London is more strong than some of the things we've seen of people who, like ourselves, are going bit by bit and working in different ways. But the Quaker influence I see is also in a healing of bringing people together to talk about it. This is an issue that a lot of people just avoid. And what we have in Quakers across the world is this connection of personal witness and political action. That how we live, we want to make that a witness in ourselves, while we're also engaging with our decision makers, whether they be local, regional, national, international. There is a huge amount going on in terms of, if you're a British Quaker, as I mentioned, the first church to divest, you have Friends House incredibly involved. You've got also connections to FWCC around. It's kind of an exciting country to be in for that. So I can, if you write to me, I will send you more links if that would be helpful. But I'd also stretch back to our communities, because I find it really easy to engage with my colleagues and really hard to engage with my friends who are not involved in this and actually don't really want to engage too much about what they can do to help, because it starts hitting their comfort zone.
Adrian, did you want to add anything as well to that question about the urgency of the crisis requiring urgent action, and how that fits with our kind of typically slow Quaker processes?
I think one of the ways we can expedite our work is to continue to move towards one another. We all have people in our sphere of influence, people we're in relationship with. I think we probably need to be more intentional in discussing with them, sharing with them our heart on this issue, and but not only that, to hear them and their perspective. I know on this call today, many of you are active at a legislative level. You're working in the political arena to change things. Others, probably more like myself, are more grassroots in our efforts, just gathering people with us to do small things in the community at times, and to hopefully broaden that out in terms of our work into other areas of community. It's connecting with one another, hearing their heart, their passion, what they sense their call is, their call to action, and then connecting, networking people, so that we can have a critical mass working in the areas of, in terms of friends working in legislation, and friends being politically active, and friends that are organizing earthcare effort within the various communities in which we live. For me, it's a call to action among Evangelical Friends Churches in North America, making that a part of their ministry matrix, if you will, part of their mission and objective. And so we each have our areas of interest and distinction, and it's connecting people with common interests that will really engage us all the more.
Thank you, Adrian. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. This also came from somebody in the UK. What are the most significant things that groups or bodies can do? Symbolic actions, practical steps? Are there simple, clear steps we can take globally to all work towards earthcare together in a unified way? Is there appetite for this? And what kind of leadership would it require? I think these are things that the group we mentioned have been grappling with. But Lindsey or Adrian, if either of you have any thoughts to share on that, it would be nice to hear them.
I think it's a similar question, but I'd like to say, as Adrian said, there are people on this call who are incredibly involved. I mean, there's someone on this call I know who is a scientist, but has gone to every single Quaker meeting in Ireland to engage their meetings on earthcare and on the spiritual transformation of this. We have a profound failing of political will in this, in all of the major Western countries, I would say. It's probably one of our greatest challenges is political will. And I think that there is both that need, again, we talk about personal witness and political action, to be seen to our decision makers that we want things, we want to be part of the change. You would be surprised how many people in that sort of decision-making position, and I hear it from negotiators who say, well, people don't want to change. But I think that's becoming less and less an easy excuse for them because they're seeing the students on the street. I had negotiators in our last dinner. We work with the negotiators about what do they want to talk about at that dinner. And these are from a huge variety, diverse group of countries. And they said, can we talk about the students? Can we talk about what's happening? So citizen visuals is profound, to put that confidence into our decision makers, but also to remember that a lot of the root causes of climate change, for example, if we take out, and I would say most of the environmental crises are based on activities which are very lucrative. And this is a money and power concern too. So we need to be out there, we need to be visual, and we need to be spiritual. Thank you.
I would just add to that, as I look at Friends' history, I find that we have been at our best when we have not been attempting to legislate the Holy Spirit, the leading of God, of the divine in the life of another person, but allowing the divine or the Spirit of God to lead that person in ways that he would want it to be. And I would also say that as a people, in Quakerdom, we've been at our worst when we've tried to legislate the Holy Spirit or the leading of the divine in another person's life. And so as we embrace the diverse activity that's going on in our effort to care for the earth, we need to be quick to realize that we're going to be called and pulled in different directions. And the appropriate thing to do is to bless one another and to try to connect one another and to resource one another as we can in our effort, and to not immediately go to majoring in the differences that have historically divided us.
Thank you both. Okay, so the next question comes from a friend in Alaska who says, in Alaska, some of my evangelical friends of various denominations see climate change as a sign of the coming end times rather than something we can affect as humans. And do you have thoughts about ways to respond? Adrian, perhaps you want to take that one first.
I just returned from Northwest Alaska. I was up there for a week for Alaska yearly meeting sessions, and some of that discussion does come up once in a while. But climate change is very real there, as each of you probably know. I was, 50 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and it was over 80 degrees every day I was there. Wow. I'd have much rather had cooler temperatures. Yes. Again, one of the problems we have in the evangelical church, and I'm not just saying Friends in particular, but is misinterpretation of Scripture. We all have a theological bias that we come to our interpretation of Scripture and how we project the end of the earth or the continuation of the earth, and we could spend a lot of time talking about that. But I think one of the best responses you can give to an evangelical friend who believes that the degradation of the earth is a part of God's plan and ultimately leading to the destruction of the earth and the creation of a new earth really would come from the theologian N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright, in his book called Surprised by Scripture, says, Jesus is coming back, so plant a tree, because it is our responsibility to demonstrate that whenever everything comes to a culmination, that we have been faithful in doing what God called us to do in the beginning, and Jesus made available for us to do today. So get out and clean your world, transform your world, plant a tree. And so I would tell them that. Don't focus on trying to figure out how the world is going to end. It's so diverse, even in the Evangelical Friends movement, understanding how the end of time will be. But continue to focus on the present. It's our watch. It's our responsibility. And Jesus expects us to be stewards of this earth. So what can you do favorably? Get out and do it.
Lindsey, did you have anything you wanted to say on that?
Just one thing that came up in our talks in the Quaker in this group was linking our sort of Western or Quakers from wealthier countries, linking them to the stories of Quakers in very poor and seriously affected countries, so they can see that there is a suffering caused by our insufficient action, and that we talk about loving our neighbor. And I think that those human stories are very important, especially when connecting, for example, with Quaker friends in I talked about Kenya, but there are other countries that are profoundly affected. And that becomes more real. That becomes more real when human suffering at our hands and on our watch is there. Thank you.
I think that actually also sort of links with the next question quite closely, which, if I can just find it, it's about how we reconcile climate justice or differentiated responsibility with the idea of a universal call to all people. So I think that was something Adrian spoke about as a sort of earthcare being a universal call to all people. But how do we reconcile that with the kind of differentiated responsibility and climate justice angle? Adrian or Lindsey, do you have anything?
I can start on differentiated. I mean, in the climate change negotiations, it's the main call is common but differentiated responsibilities. If you did a chart of the most polluting countries or the greatest emitters right now, the greatest emitter right now is China. And the greatest per capita, well, you can argue it, but it's either Canada, per capita, per person, Qatar, could even be one of the Caribbean islands when you look at their dependence on fossil fuels. We have a responsibility to be honest with ourselves and accountability. I think the words responsibility and accountability are lacking, profoundly lacking in our generations right now. And so when we talk about, yes, this is a call for all of us can act in our ways, but one flight from myself to from London to Rome is more emissions than 20% of people living on this earth will have in a year. So where is our responsibility in how we're living? Yeah, to ensure that we are not destroying the ability of others to live. And that would be my answer. It's differentiated. We have to, those of us with the most responsibility need to be at the forefront. And our sadly, not sadly, for those of us in the US, that's one of the most profound needs we have, the trust is disappearing because the country's not only pulled out, but it's reduced its funding, it's increasing its emissions. So we have a huge accountability space here to speak about that. That's all I'd say.
I couldn't agree more, Lindsey. And again, pointing back to the scriptures, the Bible tells us that those of us who have received much is expected. And we are a blessed people in the U.S., if I just speak to my own nation. And because of that blessing, we should be able to reel ourselves in, live more simple lives, take account for the footprint that we're leaving on God's creation, and be willing to alter it for the good of others. Many times we do not understand how our consumption impacts someone on the other side of the world. It's that butterfly effect that we've talked about in years gone by, but it does. What we do here does affect somewhere else on the other side of the earth. So it's being mindful of that and holding ourselves to a point of responsibility regarding that.
Thank you. Now, there's a couple of questions here which I'm sort of going to group together, and I think, Lindsey, I might ask you to focus on this, but one of the questions was about whether or not friends are familiar with Project Drawdown, and there was another question about human population and the fact that with less population growth and voluntary family planning, the rate of the increase in greenhouse gases would slow down, and there are a couple of Quaker organizations in the US that are sort of working on this and supporting slowing population growth. But I just wondered, Lindsey, if you might take this opportunity to share a little about the government officials toolkit which you've created at CUNO, and I know there is something about Project Drawdown in there, and whether you could share a little more about that work.
Sure, and maybe what you could do, Susanna, is could you put the link into the box and people could link onto it? The government officials toolkit is something that we created that you can print out in hand when you meet with a decision maker, but it includes Drawdown. So Drawdown, I think, is extremely useful, very important. We use them in part of our 20 top things to do, but I would say that Drawdown is not radical enough in terms of sustainable economic systems, which is an issue that many people aren't really, we're talking about it more. And that's why I quoted Kenneth Boulding. We have to look at what's driving our economic systems, which are driving forward this many of the root causes. But someone has mentioned here Children's Trust. I just want to say that one of the things that's happening is litigation. We would see that as a failure of action, but it's like the last how do you say, the last thing that you go to, but it's becoming quite effective. So litigation in the Children's Trust in America is to have laws. And just to remind ourselves, for example, slavery ended in the United Kingdom because of a law. They passed a law that made it the trading, right, illegal. So the law is incredibly important, and our legal systems are one of our strongest helps right now. And interestingly, in these court cases, and they're coming up all around the world, they are quoting the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. Quakers are the only faith community who are observers to the IPCC at the multilateral level. We are the only faith, and there's a meeting next weekend. Please hold me in your prayers. We are also seeing them use the Paris Agreement in these court cases. They are using the Human Rights Council. So all these things happening up at the top here are actually supporting people in the grassroots to work. And somebody mentioned in New Zealand, talking about well-being versus economics. I think we're in a period, and this is another thing that those of you who work in these fields can engage in. You know, if we calculate everything according to gross domestic product, we are just losing sight of what is happening. We never calculate environmental cost when we talk about cost. We have so many problems in how we view what is a healthy economy. And this is where we have a lot of help. So CUNO, for example, has just hired someone to work on sustainable and just economies. But this is a huge part of this. So well-being, yes, but also survival. You know, the ensuring that our ecosystems do not collapse, because we're at a track right now of temperature rise that if we do not sufficiently mitigate, we are looking at ecosystem collapse. And the amount of lives lost according to that is just, it just paralyzes me some days. So thank you.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but I think we can squeeze in one more question if we keep answers brief. So this last question I'm going to put to you both. I feel inspired by New Zealand's Prime Minister to call for evaluation of well-being rather than on economics. So they're no longer measuring GDP, but actually using a different metric to measure how well they're doing as a country. And the question is, how can Quakers work diligently to strengthen resilient communities that are strong and connected and working towards the healing of humanity? It's a big question.
Adrian, did you want to start?
Wow. I'm hearing that question thinking, that must be over my pay grade of understanding. I'm not so sure what I can contribute other than to be present, to engage that effort. I like that focus on the well-being of people. That speaks to who we are. It levels the field as, in terms of who has and who has not, but really who feels like they're cared for. And as they look at their neighbor, do they see their neighbor in need? Do they sense that their neighbor is well cared for? And I hope we can get a global movement working around that as well.
I think we also have some Quakers on this call. I think we're talking, is it Ruth from Ontario was talking about working with permaculture, working with people in nature, learning that reconnection with nature and understanding the stress that it's under and our connection with that, and also how to grow, how to care. It's one of the greatest challenges. But then briefly, someone mentioned population growth. I just wanted to say that yes, educating girls and birth control are 2 of the top 20, but and sorry, I live right next to a big church. The bells. Population growth is happening rapidly in countries that are not the highest emitters. So we need to also look at, if we're really trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, population growth is a huge stress for those countries in terms of trying to maintain a well-being amongst their populations. Yes, but they tend to be one of the lowest emitters countries that are doing that. So if we're looking at mitigation and population growth, I think we need to look at ourselves in the highest emitting countries before we're because one of our children is worth maybe 10 of theirs in terms of what their effect on the planet is. So it's finding that balance. Thank you.
Okay. We are out of time. I think we could go on a lot longer, but we did say we would keep this call to the hour. So firstly, thank you so much to Lindsey and Adrian for sharing your contributions and for answering this huge variety of questions so well. And thank you all for taking the time to be here, whatever time of day or night it is for you, and for coming together in this way. We will send out, in the coming days, we will send out the recording and the PowerPoint slides and some of the links that we've discussed during this call. So you will have all of the information to follow up with. And it would be great if you wanted to share that with other friends in your communities and engage more people in your meetings in your churches in this conversation. And we will also keep you informed of the next webinar in this series. So we will email you all when that is coming around. So we hope we can all be together again very soon. So thank you all very, very much. Take care.